My name is Joe Weibel. I'm 75 years old, and in 1952, in the spring of 1952, I lived in a little town, eastern Colorado, called Stratton, Colorado. Population of about 750, 800. The Korean War broke out in June of 1951. I think it was June, it might have been May. But anyway, come April of 52, my buddy and I decided one day when we were chasing girls that we would go to Denver and join the Air Force. It was time for us to get in the service, and we decided the Air Force was the place for us to go. So the next morning, that evening, went home, told Mother that I'm going to Denver and I'm joining the Air Force, and she didn't think that was too good. But anyway, we got on the train at 6:30 in the morning, got to Denver, went down to the recruiting office of the Air Force and said, here we are, we're joining. And we took a slight physical as they, there they check your ears, and if you can hear them, that passed the ear test, and if you can see them, that passed the eye test, and they strip your clothes off and they look at you and you're not flat-footed, they said, you're in. So we raised our right hand and we took the oath, and we got on a plane out at Lackland Air Base. I don't know whether it's a C-47 or DC-3, but we flew to San Antonio, Texas. We got there about 10 o'clock in the evening. We hadn't had anything to eat since lunch. We were hungry, and we'd been on that plane for about 4 hours, I think, flying around the thunderstorms of West Texas, and half of us were sick. It was all Air Force recruits. It was going to Lackland Air Force for basic training. We got there about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and there was so many people coming into the service at that time. Lackland had a capacity of about 75,000 troops. And at that time, there was about 125,000 troops there in basic training. They put us on a bus and took us out to what was Tent City. And they said, here's your home. Right out in the skeet and out in the prairies of South Texas. But anyway, that next morning we got up and they walked us over to eat. And then they came back and said, here's your tent, put it up. I think I was the only one that was from, well, my buddy and I are from Colorado, but I think the rest of them are all from back east, New York, Brooklyn, someplace back east. And I don't think any of them had ever seen a tent. So we started putting up our tent. That was kind of funny. Somebody was pulling on one side and somebody was pulling on the other side, and we had a heck of a time getting the tent up. And then we had to build a slit trench. And probably a lot of people don't know what a slit trench is. We didn't have a bathroom. So we dug a trench out there, and that's where we went to the bathroom, out in the slit trench. And once a day we'd get a march over and take a shower and march to chow at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon for lunch or whatever, because there were so many people there. Well, I spent about 2 weeks in Tent City because I was the only one that knew how to put up a tent. They decided that I could help these other people come in and put up tents. After about 2 weeks, they transferred me into a squadron, and I started my basic training. That was supposed to be 8 weeks, and I spent about 10 or 12 weeks in the whole process. And after that, they cut my orders, and I went to Stillwater, Oklahoma A&M. And they put me in clerk typist, administration, and supervision of administrative there, and I spent 4 or 5 months at that. Came out of that, they pushed me back down to Brooks Air Base in San Antonio, waiting on orders to go overseas. Sat there about 2 weeks, finally orders came, and I was assigned to the 6920 Security Group, APO 994, Japan, or no, APO 994 Far East. I didn't know where APO 994 was. So that was about Christmas time, and I went home for Christmas, and I reported to some Army base in California right after Christmas, right after New Year's, and boarded a plane, Flying Tigers, and the whole plane was full of GIs, or airmen and soldiers, Army, military, a bunch of us going overseas to the Far East. And they had 3 stewardesses on this plane, and they were all well built. and a whole plane load of young GIs with 3 beautiful stewardesses, and it was a fine trip. We landed in Wake Island, and landing in Wake Island is a kind of an exciting thing. You got water on the end of the runway, and you got water on the other end of the runway, so you landed in the water and took off in the water. From there we landed in Tokyo, and I get off the plane in Tokyo and walk down to the wherever the people were signing you where to go and telling you where to go. And I had my order and it said APO 994, and the sergeant, he looked at me and he says, "We don't have an APO 994 around here. It's got to be in Korea." I says, "All right, how do I get there?" And he says, "There's a plane right over there going to Korea. Get your bag and jump on." So I go to Korea, get off the plane, walk down to the flight line, and I said, "Where's APO 994? He says, "Never heard of it." He says, "But I think it may be down in Busan in southern Korea." I said, "Okay." So I was hungry, and I went to the chow hall and got me something to eat. I was broke, didn't have any money, and didn't have any cigarettes because we partied pretty good before we left the States. So I get down to Busan, and where's APO 994? Never heard of it. He says, "I would recommend you go back to Japan because it's got to be in Japan." I said, "Okay." So I went back to Tokyo, got off the plane, walked back in. I says, "Where is APO 994? I got orders for APO 994. He says, "There's a bus right there. It's leaving for APO 994. It's about 20 miles out of Tokyo." So I went to Johnson Air Base at APO 994 and checked in to 6920 Security Group, which was taking over complete control of all the radio squadrons that was in the Far East. They were just getting too busy and there was too much of action going on. So they decided to bring in a group to oversee all the radio squadrons in the Far East. And I was part of that group. Well, I walked into the 6920 Security Group's headquarters office, and the first thing the old man, he says, "Where you been?" He says, "You're AWOL. You should have been here 2 weeks ago." And I says, "Let me tell you a story. I've been all over the world." He said, "All right." So I was the number 6th person in the 6920 Security Group. And so I got a bunk and checked in, got where I was going to stay and set up for the billets. Reported back in the next morning, and the lieutenant, who was the adjutant, can't remember his name, he said, "You're the 6th man in here, and you're a corporal, so you're my first sergeant."
Well,
and I didn't even know what a first sergeant was.
For just like there's a lot of noise in the hallway, and I want to make sure that we're not getting that bleeding through. Sometimes these microphones are more sensitive than you think.
Yeah.
And I think if you just scoot your chair just a little bit around, a little bit more around like that. That's okay.
You should be at that point in your story where you're selected with 6 other guys from a large group to form 3 squads. That's what you told me. No? Well, I know you do it, whatever.
Where were you? You were kind of...
I was at Johnson Air Base. APO 994 was the Johnson Air Base, which was about 20 miles south of Tokyo. Next to Johnson Air Base, there was Yokota Air Base, and there was Shiroi Air Base on the other side of Tokyo. There was like 3 or 4 air bases around Tokyo that the Air Force had taken command of after the Second World War. And me being the 6th person in the 6920 Security Group and become first sergeant, as I told you a minute ago, I hadn't the slightest idea what a first sergeant did. You know, here I was about 6 or 9 months out of basic training. You know, I'd never met a first sergeant. So here I was. He said, "You're the first sergeant." He says, "We've got a first sergeant coming over. He'll be here, but until that, whatever I tell you to do, you do it." Because there's only 6 people in our whole organization. I was the 6th person in the 6920 Security Group. What the 6920 Security Group was doing, we had radio squadrons. We had the 1st Radio Squadron, the 15th Radio Squadron, 17th Radio Squadron, and I think there was one more, and I can't remember the name of it, that was spread out through the Far East. And what we were doing, we were coming over and taking over the administration and the operation and the control of all what these radio squadrons did in the Far East. What the radio squadrons did, or what the 6920 Security Group, their objective was to consolidate all of the information that these radio squadrons was intercepting. 6920 Security Group was an intelligence gathering organization. The first radio squadrons, they would intercept all of the radio transmissions of the North Koreans, the Chinese, the Russians, the Filipinos, the Huks, who were the communists in the Philippines. And they would gather all this information, all of the radio transmissions in the Far East. And that would all come into the 6920 Security Group. And the 6920 Security Group was going to assemble all of this air traffic, that radio air traffic, and then basically what we were an intelligence group. We were breaking codes. We had information on all of the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Huks, and the Russians that were involved in the Korean War. We were intercepting all of their radio transmissions and breaking their codes and so forth. We had the 69th 20th Security Group, when they were put together, finally got together. It's the first time I ever seen computers. We had the big IBM computers that, you know, was huge, huge. The printers would, you know, with big rooms that these computers were in. And they're different than your computers of today. They're your programmers. The program on these big computers was all done by hand. They were wire. There was a board, which they called the control board, which, I don't know, 2.5 feet long, probably 18 inches wide. And these programmers, they had wires, and they would, you know, different wires, and they would wire their own programs into these big computers. There was all of the air traffic, radio traffic, came in from all of these different sites from the radio squadrons and their detachments throughout the Far East. And all that traffic was brought into headquarters, the 6920 Security Group, and it ran through the computers. And then basically what they were doing is monitoring all of the air radio traffic of our enemy. You know, sometimes I'm getting old and senile and I can't remember words very good. But it was kind of a very, very, very interesting job. The 6920 Security Group had Russian-speaking people, Chinese-speaking people. They were college students that went to school with the Air Force to different colleges and learned to speak Chinese and Russian and Korean. And then they would translate all of this radio traffic and then go through the big computers. And we was breaking codes and listening to all this air traffic, and it was really great fun. You know, I'd sit there and see some of these reports that came out that you know, that how many Chinese pilots were flying out of this base or somebody over there. We had a U-34 spy plane that would fly from Tokyo across all this and intercept all the traffic from the radios of the Chinese and the Koreans and the Russians. And, you know, we had all that. It was quite interesting to see all the air traffic and then break codes with the big computers. And the computers were absolutely large and huge as a computer as of today. A printer in there was probably 6 feet long, probably 3 feet wide, and probably 4 or 5 feet high. And that was the printer. Huge.
Excuse me. Sorry about that.
Well, we don't need that kind of editorial commentary.
Okay, now enough about, you know, the equipment and everything like that. And my life, after being a...
Joe, just kind of make sure that you're facing a little more this way. And
Okay, right there?
So you kind of switch over to the side of the room. You kind of look
Okay.
way out off in the middle.
Okay.
So we're just kind of...
after being a first sergeant for a few days, 3 or 4 weeks, I guess, and the first sergeant showed up. And my duties then became administrative in the 69th 20th Security Group, which we had all of the people, all of the squadrons and detachments under the 69th 20th Security Group. There was the 1st Radio Squadron, the 15th Radio Squadron, the 17th Radio Squadron, 23 Radio Squadron, and I think there was one more of them. But all of their interception and traffic that they intercepted would all come back into the 69th 20th Security Group, and then it would go into our code breakers. And then we would take all this traffic that we intercepted, and we knew basically what the enemy was doing, or trying to find out what the enemy was doing. I was the first acting first sergeant for about 3 weeks. Then the master sergeant came in, the regular first sergeant, and my duties got changed a little bit. And Colonel Sawyer, who was then the commanding officer of the 69th 20th Security Group, he said, I think it was the fall, and he called me in one day and he says, Joe, he says, it was then Sergeant Weibel, wasn't Joe, but he said, we need some activity for our people. How about us getting a basketball team? And I said, oh, I think we can arrange that. So I became then the chief coach and bottle washer and schedule maker and everything for the 69th 20th Security Group, and went down to the base, the Johnson Air Base, and reserved the gym, and put a big notice on the bulletin board, basketball, 69th 20th Security Group basketball team tryouts, whatever date it was. Don't remember. But anyway, had about 30 guys show up, and they were all college graduates that played college ball. And here I am, 5'7", 5'7.5", and these guys show up 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", and played college ball. And I'm the coach, the manager, and the finds the bus to travel and everything else, and we form a basketball team. And you know, when you play a bunch of enlisted guys with college players, you have quite a time. But anyway, we ran around we picked a team of 12 guys, and I was the manager and the water boy and the coach and everything else, and made schedules and got teams formed to play. And we ran around the Far East playing basketball games when their duty would let us play. We may take 6 guys with us. The other guys would be working someplace. We had a great team. I think we was like 57-2 for that year, and had a great time. When the team, we'd play somebody, and I'd say, who wants to start this game? And so 5 guys went in and started, and they play 5 minutes, then somebody else play 5 minutes. And when the score got out of hand, I held up my hand and says, my turn to play. I wasn't very good either, but I could get a lot of schedules to play. Then the old man, he called, Colonel Sawyer, not the old man, but he was the old man. He called one day and he said, Joe, we need a softball team. And I said, all right, we'll have a softball team. So I organized a softball team, and we had a great softball team too. It was, we had college kids that played, in New York and, all over, that was tremendous softball pitchers. I'd never seen, living out in the prairies of eastern Colorado, I'd never seen softball pitchers that could wind up and throw like that. So we had a heck of a softball team, and that's where I learned to catch softball. And I played softball for years after that, and I really enjoyed the fast pitch softball. Tremendous game. Slow pitch I hate, but fast pitch was a great game. So we ran around the Far East playing softball, and that was a lot of fun. And where am I at?
How about, are you going to tell us how confidential and secret the compound was, and the incident where the general was refused entry?
Okay. At Johnson Air Base was the headquarters for the 69th 20th Security Group. The Johnson Air Base, they were they furnished us our quarters, our food, transportation, and we had our own there was the Far East, the Air Force regulations, then there was the Far Eastern Air Force regulations, and we were in the 5th Air Force, so we had the 5th Air Force regulations, and then there was the Johnson Air Base regulations, and then our Colonel Sawyer decided that, we are so independent of everybody, being kind of spies. He said, we'll just write our own regulations, 6920 security group regulations. And they superseded just about everything except, you can't tell another general very much to whatever. But anyway, we wrote our own regulations for the 6920 security group. And we had our compound was fenced compound. We had our own APs. We had our own security gate. But we lived at Johnson Air Base, and they furnished us housing and transportation. But we had our own APs. We had our own security gate to get into the compound. And one day, the base commander of Johnson Air Base, he comes flying up there with his car and his flags waving on each side of the car. And he jumped out of the car and he started through that gate. Well, those APs just jumped out and says, "Where are you going, sir?" And both of them had guns. And he says, "I'm going in." He says, "No, you're not." He says, "You don't have clearance to go in there." He says, "Well, I just got here and I'm reviewing my base and I can go in there." And he says, "No, you can't." So there was a standoff until Colonel Sawyer came over and talked to him, and he says, "If you get your clearance cleared up, you can go in there." It was a top secret cryptographic clearance area. Not very many people got to go in there. So that was kind of interesting. See the base commander get held up by a couple, I think they were corporals, with their rifles.
Did you enjoy seeing that?
Yes, I did. The security group, we received through the radio squadrons. We had radio squadrons in the Philippines and Formosa, all over Korea, and they gathered all of the radio transmissions of the enemies. North Korea, the Russians, the Chinese, the Huks out of Philippines, and probably a lot of you people never even heard of the Huks. They were a communist group that tried to take over the Philippines in the early 50s, and they were kind of nasty people. You go down to there, you would be escorted with rifles behind you and in front of you, because they were kind of nasty people, the Huks in the Philippines. But anyway, all the radio transmission that we received from all of the communist countries at that time came that we monitored, control, and intercepted all of that, and all of that stuff came in to the 6920 security group. And then we had Chinese linguist, Russian linguist, and the Korean linguist, and they were code breakers, and they broke the codes. And we found out exactly what the enemy was doing with through the air traffic that we monitored and intercepted. We had our linguists. They all went to school at either Syracuse. They studied Russian, Chinese, or whatever, and then they would work on breaking the codes and the radio traffic from these different countries. It was really quite exciting. The compound that I worked in was completely fenced. We had AP guards at all the gates, and unless you carried a top secret or cryptographic clearance, you couldn't get in. It was there.
Did you have a General MacArthur story that was interesting? You told me something about that.
No. I seen General MacArthur one time. We were at May Day in downtown Tokyo. We had a liaison office in the Meiji building in downtown Tokyo. And this was in 53, I think, 1953, when they had the big May Day riots in Tokyo. And the Communist Party, they came out and they rioted in downtown Tokyo. And it was May Day, and that was the communist holiday. And I just happened to be at the Meiji building downtown Tokyo, and that was our headquarters for all the security service for all the branches of our military. The Navy, the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, they all had their intelligence in the Meiji building. And you walked in that building, you took off your shirt, you just worked in a t-shirt because General may be in there, and he had there was no rank in that building. It was a spy building, intelligence building. And but anyway, on May Day, it was riots. They burning American cars, and throwing people in the moat and everything else. And I was up on the top floor of the Meiji building in downtown Tokyo watching all this riot going on. It was kind of interesting. I had a whole bunch of film that I took, and I sent it to Honolulu to get developed, and never got it back. Somebody else wanted it worse than I did, or whoever found it. I didn't get it back, and I really wanted to see that film of burning cars and riots in downtown Tokyo.
What effect, Joe, did the Korean conflict have on the economy of Japan?
In the economy in Japan in the late 40s, early 50s was really, they didn't have any economy. They were coming out of, the World War II. They were bombed terribly. Their industry was totally gone. They really didn't have much to offer. And when the Korean War broke out, all of the big steel companies in Japan became repair shops for the American armor trucks and everything. Anything that needed rebuilt or anything came to Tokyo, and Mitsubishi and that was rebuilding tanks, and the economy, all of a sudden when the Korean War broke out, all of these air bases were taken over by the American forces or the Australian forces. It was a multi-international fight, in Korea, but I think there was 62 countries involved in I'm not sure that's right. I don't know how many it was. But the world, all of these countries that came into fight the Korean War. And the economy in Japan just exploded. All the heavy industry, and the American GI spend money like crazy. When they get a furlough out of Korea, they just come to Tokyo. They came to Tokyo. That's where they got their R&R. They'd come to Tokyo with $500 in their pocket and spend 2 weeks and go home broke. And the Ginza, which is one of the largest trading streets in the world, they love the GI because they spend money like crazy, especially the ones that came in from Korea that've been over there, for 6 months. So they got a 2-week R&R, and they come to Tokyo and spend all the money they had. Where am I at?
Well, I'm sort of in your career where now you get all this filing system poured at you and you know nothing about it?
When the 69th 20th Security Group was formed, I was the 6th person into the 69th 20th Security Group, and after being an acting first sergeant for about 3 weeks, and running a softball team and running a basketball team and whatever the Colonel Sawyer wanted me to do, one day he was looking for some paper on something, I'm not sure what it was, and he couldn't find it. Nobody could find it. And I got a call, and he said, Joe, he says, you're going to set up a filing system for the 69th 20th Security Group. And I said, all right, I don't know anything about it, but I'll set one up. So I started all of the paper, the flow of traffic that these radio squadrons under the, I think I told you, under the 69th 20th Security Group in the Far East, they had the radio squadrons, and then under the squadrons there was detachments. And they intercepted all of the Korean, the North Korean, the Chinese, and the Russian radio traffic. They intercepted it all, put it on teletype paper, and it was forwarded either by carrier or by radio back to the headquarters 69th 20th Security Group. These radio squadrons were out in the field, and they intercepted all of the radio traffic that our enemy had. And then we had in the 69th 20th Security Group, and then in the compound, we had people that were very fluent in Chinese and in Korean and Russian language. And they would take and break the code and intercept all these radio transmissions and use the big computers. And we broke all their codes, and we had total control of all the radio traffic of the Korean war of our enemy. So all of this traffic came on teletype, and I don't know, teletype was a computer that works on, I mean, not a computer, but a typewriter that just got a big roll of paper, and this stuff just keeps chattering in and chattering in. And that's where the linguists got all of this transmission, and they broke the codes with the computer. We had computer specialists. They were code breakers. That's what the big computers were. They broke the Chinese code, the Russian code, and the North Korean code. So we had total control of their air traffic through the radios. And so we had reams and bushels and baskets and boxes of paper from this teletype. And they would just store it. It's just over there in boxes. And they'd want something, they'd spend days and days trying to find a roll of paper. So Colonel Sawyer one day says, Joey says, you're going to set up a filing system for me. And I said, I don't know anything about it. He says, well, it says here you went to Oklahoma A&M as administrative, clerk typist, and administrative supervisor, and you're going to set me up a filing system so I'll know we can file it and I'll know where it's at when I want it. Okay. And you can't believe the amount of paper that comes through that place every day with all these teletype machines from all over these different radio squadrons and detachments coming in, just reams and reams and reams of paper every day. So I got a little cubicle back there in the back of this compound, which is behind wire fence and guards, and I walked into this little room, and it was stacked to the wall with paper everywhere. And I didn't know anything about filing systems. They said, you know, I'd been to administrative school, and so I should set up a filing system. So I called a friend of mine down at base, and I said, what do you know about filing system? And he said, well, he says, a Dewey Decimal System, that's a good filing system. So I went down there, and he explained to me the Dewey Decimal System. So I came back, and I tried to organize a Dewey Decimal System, and I got about halfway decent filing system, and it took me months, and about I got 4 or 5 other guys to help me. Told the colonel that I had to have help. So we set up a filing system for the 6920 security group, and so when the colonel could call, he could get what he wanted. I spent I think it was almost 2.5 to 3 years at Johnson Air Base, which was just north of Tokyo, about 30 miles. And I'll tell you something about Tokyo in the 50s, early 50s. It was a wonderful place to take an R&R. An R&R is rest and relaxation. And a lot of people call it drinking and having fun. And Tokyo was a great place to have fun, especially for a GI with a pocket full of money, because, you know, the Japanese came out of that terrible war and they didn't have anything, and they were always looking for money. And I bought, you know, a couple sets of dishes of the Noritake china, and for my mother and for myself. But Tokyo was a great place. Had a lot of fun over Tokyo. A lot of good bars. And from Johnson Air Base, it got the 6920 Security Group got so big during the Korean War that we built a new big headquarters at Shroy Air Base, which was on the other side of Tokyo. And there was a Lester E. Guckenberger, who was a very good friend of mine, and a lieutenant, I can't remember his name, but Les and myself and this lieutenant, no, he's a captain, and myself, we were transferred to Shroy Air Base, which is on the other side of Tokyo, to form the big new headquarters for the 6920 Security Group. And we were going to build, Shroy Air Base was just a little bitty air base. I mean, it was really just out in the boomies. And our job, when we sent over there, to build a big new headquarters for the 6920 Security Group. And we built a huge building. Well, we contracted the Air Force with the government, contracted the Japanese, and we built or overseen this huge headquarters building. It's at Shroy Air Base. And it was a beautiful building. You know, you ever see a Japanese cut a log? They didn't have power equipment. They had a 2-bladed saw. They had blades on top and on the bottom, and they would stand on that log, you know, and they would this saw, they would cut a log, and they could cut a straight line, and it was all manpower there. They didn't have cranes to lift buildings and all that. But we built, Les and I and this captain, we built a big headquarters at Shroy Air Base just south of Tokyo. And just as this building was getting completed, my tour of duty of 33 months in Japan came to an end. And I flew over to Japan in a Flying Tigers with these pretty girls.
Don't tap your feet so much there because we're picking
Okay.
that up. It's kind
Okay. And so getting ready to rotate back to the United States after 33 months in the Far East, and it was a tremendous experience. Man, you know, the education that I got, seeing the people over there, I had a lot of fun over there. And my dad was always worried that I'd marry a Japanese girl, and he just, you know, he'd always write me a letter, says, Joe, come back single. Joe, come back single, and I did. But anyway, I rotated back, but I took a ship back. I'd never been on the sea, on the ocean, and Colonel Sawyer asked me, he says, how do you want to go home? You can fly or you can go by ship. And I says, I'll go by ship. So we went, I reported to duty down, or to debarkation zone at Camp Drake. And that's where everybody departed Japan, either come in or go back out. And I think I had like 3 quarts of whiskey with me when I got there, because, you know, you go on ship, you just can't be without booze. So we were going through boarding, you know, and one of the questions was, you got any whiskey or any alcohol? And I said, yeah, I got 3 quarts. And he says, you can't take it. You can't take it. We won't let you get on that ship with any booze. So that night, before we left, at that tent where I was staying, we drank it all. Oh, we drank it all. I got on ship the next morning with a beautiful hangover. Oh, beautiful hangover. And we sat in dry dock that evening, and that boat was going up and down and up and down and up and down. And, you know, it was a big USS Anderson, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 GIs going home on that boat. And I got sick. Oh, I've never been seasick in my life, but I got seasick at dock. Now, that's pretty hard to do, but I got seasick right at dock. I was seasick halfway back across the ocean before I got home. I got back to the States, and I had a few months to go yet to stay in the service. And I reported back to the United States Air Force Security Service in San Antonio, Texas at Kelly Air Base. And that's where all of the security service for the Air Force was at. We were on it when I was in Japan. The 69th 20th Security Group answered directly back to headquarters in San Antonio. One interesting thing, I don't know whether I said this or not, but when I was with over there in Japan at the 69th 20th Security Group, as we was getting started, this Colonel Sawyer, he was quite a character himself. And one day he said he wanted something, and so we looked in the Air Force, all Air Force, USAF regulations. He didn't like what he seen there. Then he looked in the 5th Air Force regulations, which was the one that controlled the Far East. And then there was, the Far East, and then the 5th Air Force, and then the Johnson Air Base regulations. He couldn't find anything that he liked. So he says, Joe, let's write our own regulations. So we wrote the 69th 20th Security Group regulations, and we did just about anything we wanted. If it didn't really like, if he didn't like, our regulations we didn't like, we'd find a regulation in any of these others, and that's what we did. We, you know, it was kind of the deal. People left us alone. You know, just like that general trying to come on our compound. You know, we were top secret, cryptographic, and unless you had a cryptographic clearance, there are certain areas you just could not get. Period.
I think I've got a couple of questions here.
Okay.
I'd like to clarify and expand on a couple of points you were talking about there. You talked about this code breaking operation that you had there in the cryptographic. Was it relatively easy or hard to break these codes?
It was terribly hard because
Go ahead and talk to John here.
breaking code in those days was terribly hard because these wire boards. Uh, Today you've got the high-speed computers that you can just type in and everything. On the boards then they were all wired, and there was we had linguists there, the Chinese linguists, the Russian linguists, the North Korean linguists, whatever, and these linguists they would sit there with the board, and they would take wires and just try to break these codes and put them in. They had the card punchers. They punched everything on a card. They ran them through a sorter. Then they would take them through a printer, and they would take these printers and they would run it out, and he'd look at it and he says, "This don't make sense." So he'd pull the board back out and he'd change some more wires. He'd push them back in, run some more cards through. This don't look right either, and it may take 2 weeks to find the code to break or find out really what he wanted with the air traffic coming in.
Did the enemy change their codes often? Did you have to go constantly do this?
They had to constantly do that. They spent all their time. If the enemy thought they had really a code that couldn't be broke, they would go a long time. But usually they could break the code within a month, and we knew everything about them, their bases, what their names were, where they were living, if they were married. One interesting thing was that we had the radio squadrons and the detachments over there. They was mobile, and they would move to different sectors of Korea or the Philippines, Formosa, or wherever. And we also had a spy plane that flew, and it was like the U-2. It was a U-34, and it would go so high. They would take off from Japan and fly to Alaska, and they would go over the top of China or whatever. And there was no plane in our enemy's arsenal that could get up high enough to get to the U-34. And that was part of our arsenal too, the plane. I remember one incident. This one, they found they had a tunnel cut through the mountain getting troops through, and they decided that we ought to see that. So they loaded up early one morning, and they went in hopping the waves down and got right down there. Up they go. And they came back across, and the MiGs followed them. The U-34 was way up there, and the MiGs were down here. And when they got closer to Japan, the F-80s went up this way, and the MiGs went that way, and our plane come on home. So it was quite interesting. We knew a lot about it, the enemy.
You talked about the riots there in Japan, and it was kind of an interesting time post-war because you were after World War II, where it had been such bitter enemies. Now you're there occupying the country, and you've got communists rioting. You don't think much about Japanese communists, do you? What was the general feeling of the Japanese towards the Americans there?
I wasn't there when they, when the first troops went into Japan after World War II. I understand from a couple of my friends that went in then that there was hostility against the American troops at first. Their economy, they didn't have any economy. They were, Tokyo was pretty burnt down, the big fires there. Even when I was there was a lot of scars of the big fire bombings across Japan. I mean, Tokyo, they bombed Tokyo with, and the homes in Tokyo, they were so close together, and they were just, grass and very, and they came in with these firebomb runs, and the firebomb runs, they would generate their own wind, and they just absolutely burnt Tokyo, a lot of it to the ground. And there was a lot of animosity against the American troops when they landed first in Japan, because really a lot of the people wanted to die, fight dying, and that was their motto, we'll never surrender. But when I got there, most of that animosity had gone away, and Japanese people were pretty nice because all of a sudden their economy just spun around like that. All of these American troops coming in there with all this money, and their heavy industry was doing all the repair work to tanks, and we had these planes in there, and R&R guys coming out of Korea. They were spending money like crazy, and I remember when MacArthur left Japan. When he got told to come home, Truman told him he was replaced. And I was in downtown Tokyo when MacArthur left. And the Japanese people cried seeing MacArthur leave because they loved MacArthur because he really liberated them. I'm not sure I believe that, but the Japanese people loved MacArthur. And when he left, driving down the Ginza, not the Ginza, by the palace. I can't remember the name of that street, but the moats and the palace there. Meiji Building was on this side, but he drove down on the way to the airport, and the Japanese people cried because he was leaving, because their economy and freedom. They had more freedom then than they did under the post-war when the military had taken over control of Japan. In my almost 3 years in Japan, I never ran into any hostility. I run all over that country of Japan with basketball teams, softball teams, and on leaves I'd go visit different towns and I was crawled up on top of Mount Fuji and all that, and I had nothing but really a good time in Japan. Worked my butt off, but I had a great time there, and I did a lot of traveling through there.
Did you travel over to Korea or to any of the other?
Yeah, I forgot to tell one story about when I got to Korea. Yeah, but I did a little courier duty to Korea. We would go over to either Seoul or Busan, or all depends where the fighting was going on. I was at a island offshore at the 38th parallel. There was a little island offshore that we had a detached radio squadron. We had an antenna, and this island was kind of from the sea. It came up like this and hill, and then came back over, and the mainland Korea was there. And we had our Quonset hut and radio receiving facilities here, where artillery from the Koreans, the North Koreans, they would shoot. They couldn't hit us because they couldn't drop it down like this. It came over the top. And the first night I was there, the artillery started, and I went running out of the barracks like crazy and jumped into a slit trench because I thought the artillery was coming in, but everybody was standing in the barracks laughing at me because that's the only entertainment they had, was some rookie coming over there thinking he was going to get killed. But what else did the questions you asked me?
I think you have a couple here that.
Just one minor question, Joe, and that's with the basketball and the softball teams. Were those put together to entertain the troops around?
It was to give our own, the entertainment, the softball teams, the basketball teams, the baseball teams that I helped put together. I also had a baseball team. I got a little story to tell you about that baseball team. They were kind of a morale builder for the group. Johnson Air Base had a tremendous baseball team. Oh, they had a tremendous baseball team. And they played we had 3 guys that played on that baseball team that played for the World Air Force Championship in the United States. Johnson Air Base, I think in the Korea and Japan, I think their record in 1953 was like 80 or 90 to 2. The baseball team, they had a tremendous baseball team. When I was in Shiroi Air Base, where we built this new headquarters, I played baseball there with the Shiroi, with the 69th 20th baseball team, and I caught. And we played the Army out of, I can't even think, and Leo Kiley, who pitched for the Boston Red Sox. He was a great left-handed pitcher for the Boston Red Sox. And I think every player on the Camp Drake baseball team had played Major League Baseball or was a Major League Baseball player. And Leo Kiley was a left-handed pitcher for the Boston Red Sox, and we played them. And I caught, and I think I came up to bat 3 times, and I got 1 loud foul. And Leo was pitching, and his strike zone was about like that. I mean, and he's a big left-hander, and he comes sideways at you. And the first time he threw that pitch, I bailed out. I dropped to the ground. I knew it was going to get hit, and that ball just came right across the plate. Strike 1.
So I think the direction of Phil's question was, to what benefit did this give our troops? I mean, did it entertain them, or was it just for the guys that played ball?
No, the question of the sports activities within the Air Force on Johnson Air Base, Roy Air Base, it was a morale builder because everybody got a chance to try out. There was, I don't know how many softball teams on, say, Johnson Air Base. It was a large air base, and every squadron or detachment had their own softball team. And they were playing softball pretty near year-round there on account of the weather. The same way, each base had their own baseball team, or each squadron might have their own baseball team if they were a big enough squadron. So there was a tremendous amount of sports activity there, and anybody that wanted to participate in the game at some level had that opportunity, because, if you're working 14 hours a day, or you're cooped up in a base in a foreign country, you've got to have something to keep the guys going and give them some activity rather than going to town and chase girls. And a lot of that was off limits. You had certain times you leave base, certain times you had to be home. So the sports played a great part in the activity of our troops over there. And I got involved in a lot of the sports for our 6920 security group over there.
Did you have guys from Korea coming over on the R&R come to the games?
Eddie Lopat, the great pitcher for the Yankees, he brought a baseball team over in 53 or 54, I'm not sure which it was, and they played I don't know how many games in Japan. It was the Lopat's All-Stars. After the World Series in the United States, he brought this baseball team, and Yogi Berra was on it, and Eddie Lopat, and I don't know if Bob Feller was or not, but it was all major league players after the World Series, and they came over there and played Japanese teams. And the GIs got a lot of tickets to that to see major league play. And the Japanese are baseball crazy over there. They play baseball all the time. And we played Japanese teams, and sports was a great part of the activity to keep the troops happy over there, because there was 3 things, work, sports, drink, and girls. And that's why a lot of people, Colonel Sawyer was just adamant about a lot of sports to keep the guys' minds sharp, because they were breaking codes, they were doing all this, and they needed some extra activity.
That was 4 things.
Did I say 4 things?
You said 3 things.
3 things, 4 things. I'm sorry.
Sports, booze, and women.
Yeah,
4.
4, okay.
You put drink and girls together, so I'm wondering if there's a subliminal message there.
I don't really know. When I got back to the United States, I reported back to Air Force headquarters, Security Service headquarters in San Antonio, and I had about, I guess 9 months left on my 4-year term or something like that. And they decided that I was going to re-enlist, and they sent me up to Cheyenne, that air base up there. Man, can't even remember it now. And I took a course up there in management, Air Force management, and I went back to Kelly, their headquarters, Air Force Security Service, and the general called one day, and he said, I was looking at your record, and you're going to pick a group, and you're going to rewrite our filing system for the whole Air Force Security Service. So he gave me a couple guys, and we redid the Dewey Decimal System, which is the basic filing system for most all businesses, and it's a number system to file with. So we wrote the new Dewey Decimal System for the Air Force Security Service, and that was my last project with the Air Force, and then I retired, and I got discharged in April of 1955.
Was that ever reduced to printed form? book,
Oh,
or-
it was written book, and it was then the whole Air Force Security Service used that filing system from then on.